3 words started a firestorm. Be like Biff. That was all it took. The moment Cletus McFarland finished his Grand Marshal command at Michigan International Speedway on June 6, 2026, NASCAR Twitter did not wait. The comments came fast, they came hard, and they came from every direction. Fans were not just upset, they were furious, and the reason was a name that Cletus never said. A name that, given the timing, given the setting, given everything the sport had just been through, a massive portion of the NASCAR fan base felt should have been impossible to leave out. Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch had died just 16 days earlier on May 21, 2026. He was 41 years old. He was the winningest Truck Series driver of all time with 69 victories. He was a 2-time Cup Series champion. He had spent over 2 decades as one of the most important, most polarizing, and most talented drivers the sport had ever produced. And here was Cletus McFarland, sitting inside a Truck Series vehicle, giving one of the biggest commands in motorsports, and Rowdy's name was nowhere in it. The backlash that followed was immediate, ugly, and it did not stay just about the command. It became something much bigger. So let's go back to the beginning of that weekend and break down exactly how all of this unfolded. Michigan International Speedway had announced earlier that week that Cletus McFarland would pull double duty at the DQS Solutions and Staffing 250, serving as both the Grand Marshal and a competing driver in the race itself. It was an unusual setup from the moment it was announced. Joe Fowler, president of Michigan International Speedway, framed it as a natural pairing. Bringing a wheelman like Cletus McFarland to the heart of the automotive capital is a perfect pairing, Fowler said. Cletus is a natural-born entertainer and one of the biggest names in racing today. There's no doubt he's going to energize the crowd before putting on a show for our fans as the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series returns to the Irish Hills. When the moment arrived for the command itself, there was no stage, no podium, no formal setup. A microphone was handed directly through his window because Cletus was already strapped into the know. 4 Nice Motorsports Chevrolet buckled up and ready to race the very event he was about to start. From inside the cab, he delivered his command. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just 3 things to say. Be like Biff, do it for Dale. And drivers, start your engines. The crowd at Michigan responded exactly the way you would expect. It was energetic, it was loud, and it fit perfectly with who Cletus McFarland is as a personality. Both references carried genuine personal weight for him. Biff is Greg Biffle, the retired NASCAR driver, who had developed a close friendship with Cletus in the years leading up to his death. Biffle and McFarland had a growing friendship, with Biffle becoming a regular racer at McFarland's Florida racetrack called the Freedom Factory. Biffle died tragically in a plane crash in December 2025, just months before this race. Do It for Dale references Dale Earnhardt, who died in the 2001 Daytona 500, and that phrase has been woven into Cletus's racing identity for years. In isolation, the command made complete sense for who he is and where his racing inspirations come from. But the sport was not operating in isolation. NASCAR was still raw. The community was still processing the loss of Kyle Busch, who had died just over 2 weeks before this race. And Cletus was not just anywhere. He was sitting inside a Truck Series vehicle, giving the command to start a Truck Series race. The series where Kyle Busch had built an all-time record. The series where Rowdy had won 60 times. A number that no driver in history has come close to matching. That context made the omission impossible for a large part of the fan base to ignore. A single mention, just the word Rowdy, somewhere in that command, would likely have prevented everything that came next. Instead, what came next was an explosion on social media. The reaction on X was immediate and it did not hold back. One fan wrote, "What about Kyle Busch?" Another said, "Rude to leave out Kyle." A third went further, "Kind of forgot someone, you giant douchebag." Another posted, "Thanks for remembering my hero, Kyle Busch, you dip." One user raised a wider point about Cletus's relationship with Kyle's legacy entirely. Does Cletus have something against Kyle Busch? I can't recall him ever talking about him in his VODs and obviously shafted him here. He's the winningest truck driver and you don't recognize him while you're sitting in a truck. Weird. Another user added bluntly, "Dude didn't even acknowledge Kyle Busch." And one more put it simply, "It sat with me wrong knowing he left Kyle Busch out." But the backlash did not stop there. It evolved. What started as frustration over the Kyle Busch omission quickly expanded into a broader debate about Cletus McFarland's presence in NASCAR altogether. One user wrote, "I've never seen a backmarker get this much attention." Another said, "Okay, enough of Cletus. Move on." The conversation had shifted completely. It started with one command, then became a debate about Kyle Busch, then became a debate about whether NASCAR is giving Cletus too much spotlight. All of it traced back to 3 words delivered from inside a truck window. Not everyone, however, agreed with the outrage. A portion of the fan base pushed back and made arguments that are genuinely worth hearing. One user responded directly to the backlash. "This is such a weird thing to get mad about. Cletus had no connection to Kyle. Dale was an inspiration to him, and Biffle was his close friend. He doesn't have to talk about everybody." Another supporter made a pointed observation about what Cletus actually brings to the series. So-called NASCAR fans mad because Cletus is bringing fanfare and an audience to an otherwise dead truck series that nobody watches. You should be thankful. And one more put it plainly. We all miss Kyle, but he doesn't need to be mentioned in everything. Those arguments have real merit. Cletus McFarland is not a lifelong NASCAR insider. He is a YouTube personality and car enthusiast who built his audience through drag racing, custom builds, and the Freedom Factory in Bradenton, Florida. His racing influences are Dale Earnhardt and Greg Biffle, both figures who are deeply tied to his personal story in the sport. It is entirely plausible that his command was never designed to be a tribute to anyone beyond those two names. He was not trying to deliver a comprehensive eulogy. He was being himself. But intent and timing are two separate things, and they collided badly at Michigan. The fair read on this situation requires holding both truths at once. Cletus probably should have known that a Kyle Busch mention would matter, not because he was obligated to, but because the awareness of that moment should have been there. A Truck Series race, weeks after the sport lost the greatest Truck Series driver who ever lived, is not a neutral setting. Anything connected to Kyle's memory right now is being watched closely by the entire NASCAR community. That is simply the reality of where the sport is in 2026. At the same time, there is something worth noting that the loudest critics seem to overlook. Cletus had a no. 8 decal on his truck at Michigan, a direct tribute to Kyle Busch. He did not ignore Kyle's death entirely. He honored it on the car itself. And the complicated history between the two is worth understanding. Before Kyle Busch passed, he had taken a public shot at Cletus's racing credentials. When asked about the driver approval process, Kyle quipped, "My son has probably run more races than he has, and he's 10 years old." That comment circulated widely. So the idea that Cletus had a deep, warm relationship with Kyle Busch that he was deliberately snubbing simply does not hold up to the facts. Now, as for the race itself, Corey Heim won the DQS Solutions and Staffing 250, holding off his Tricon Garage teammate Caden Honeycutt by just 0.65 seconds at the checkered flag, one of the tightest finishes of the Truck Series season. It was Heim's 26th career victory and his first ever at Michigan International Speedway, giving him series wins now on 22 different tracks, second best all time. It was also his third win in only 5 truck starts this season, coming just 1 week after he announced he would join the championship-leading 23X Racing organization in the NASCAR Cup Series for 2027. Carson Hocevar was the most dominant truck on the day, leading a race-high 65 of 126 laps in the number 77 Spire Motorsports Chevrolet. He was running strong all afternoon but dealt with overheating issues in the closing laps and could not hold off Heim's late charge. Chandler Smith and Lane Riggs rounded out the top 5. Riggs, who had won the previous 2 races, fought back from going a lap down after a pit stop issue to finish 5th, and stayed atop the championship standings by 26 points over Honeycutt. And then there was Cletus. He finished 25th on the lead lap after a late race spin that brought out one of 7 caution flags on the afternoon. On paper, 25th does not look like much, but the context around that result matters enormously. His only other Truck Series start before Michigan was the season opener at Daytona, where he lasted just 6 laps before crashing out after getting loose exiting turn 4 and overcorrecting. At Michigan, he spun. He hit the wall in practice, but he did not end up in the garage. He completed the race. Fan favorite Cletus McFarland rallied from a late race spin that brought out one of 7 yellow flags and finished 25th on the lead lap in only his second series start. After the race, Cletus was characteristically honest about all of it. "Man, learned a ton," he said. Corey Heim won. "I basically got second, obviously, because I finished and I'm now 50% on my truck races. Made it past my record of 6 laps. He knew exactly what 25th meant and what it did not mean. The self-awareness was real. But behind the humor was a genuine point. He had finally completed a Truck Series race, and the education that comes from finishing laps is something no crash can teach you. The biggest lesson Cletus took from Michigan was a technical one that will matter going forward. The things that I really learned was driving the truck sideways a little bit. Obviously, I did have one mishap, but so many laps I'm sideways, right? But these trucks have such a big wing and so much side force. When a truck steps out, you can really keep driving through it. That is a fundamental shift in understanding from what happened at Daytona. At Daytona, when his truck stepped out, he snapped it back too hard and destroyed everything within a handful of laps. At Michigan, he felt the movement, understood the limit, and kept going. He connected both moments directly. I think back to Daytona when I wrecked. The truck stepped out and I just was like, oh, and turned down the track and wham. Now I know the limits and I feel so much better about Talladega. On the specific spin during the race, he did not deflect. Well, I think in Daytona it was just purely an overreaction. Here, I knew what was happening. I went in too fast and I had dirty air and I just knew I was at the mercy of the slide. I actually caught it and then I lost it. That kind of honest breakdown is exactly what keeps his audience engaged. He is not manufacturing excuses. He is processing the mistake out loud and applying it forward. He closed his post-race comments by saying, "The whole day was a huge learning experience. Finishing was enough for me." His next confirmed NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series start is expected to be Talladega later this season. And after Michigan, he is going into that high-speed drafting environment with something he did not have before. A completed race under his belt and a clearer understanding of how these trucks behave at the limit. But the backlash is not going away. Cletus McFarland now occupies a strange and complicated space inside NASCAR. He brings new fans, live stream energy, and a completely different audience demographic to a series that desperately needs eyeballs. That is genuinely valuable to the sport. But because his fame arrived before his results, every single moment gets placed under a microscope. If he spins, people say he does not belong. If he gets a grand marshal role, people say NASCAR is forcing him on the audience. If he gives a command and does not mention Kyle Busch, people accuse him of disrespect. That is the price of being a crossover name in a sport that protects its traditions. The command went viral because it was loud and memorable. The backlash exploded because the timesing was emotionally raw, and the symbolism of the setting was impossible to separate from Kyle Busch's legacy. The race itself showed that Cletus is still learning, still making mistakes, but also making measurable progress from one start to the next. The real question now is straightforward. Will the NASCAR fanbase give him the space to develop, or has the noise around every Cletus McFarland moment already made fair judgment impossible? That question does not have a clean answer yet. But Talladega is coming, and after Michigan, at least he knows what he is doing when the truck steps out. Did Cletus McFarland disrespect Kyle Busch, or was this just a case of terrible timing? Drop your answer in the comments below.